Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. You are now listening to The Right Side. I am your host, Jeff Doggett, coming to you on the greatest station in the nation, from the greatest location in the nation, WMDS, No Static Radio. For all of you that are listening to us as far north as Kennebunkport, Maine, as far south as Key West, Florida, as far east as Long Island, New York, and as far west as Long Beach, California, we say hello to you and all those points in between. For those of you that are listening to us around the world, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, whichever greeting best suits the time zone that you are in. There are several things that you can do to stop the spread of respiratory diseases such as COVID-19. Number one, wash your hands with warm soap and water for at least 20 seconds. Now, if you don't know what 20 seconds are, all you have to do is sing happy birthday to yourself, and when you completed the song, you've completed 20 seconds. Number two, cover your mouth when you cough or sneeze. Yes, I know that's common sense, you say, but how many of you are like me know that the least common thing these days is common sense? Number three, stay at home when you are sick and stay away from people who are sick. That job, that whatever it is that you feel that you just have to be at because it can't go on without you, guess what? It will. So stay at home when you are sick and stay away from people who are sick. Wipe down frequently touched objects and items with some type of disinfectant. And oh, by the way, in your vehicle, be it a car, SUV, a van, whatever the case may be, please mix in some hand sanitizer so that when you go to the gas station and pump gas, you will have something to cleanse your hands with, since you do not know who handled that pump prior to you. And this was brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters in this station, No Static Radio, WMDS, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise, powered by Google and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines. If you are in the Cleveland area on the first or third Saturday of each month, I've got some outstanding news for you. At 6812 Woodland Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio, between the hours of 10 a.m. and 2 p.m., they are giving away a free bag of groceries. Now listen, you do not have to show proof of residence. You do not have to show proof of income. You do not have to show proof of anything. The only thing that you do have to show is up, in that you show up so that you can get the free bag of groceries, no questions asked. And yes, if you've been there before, you can go back again. Nobody's going to say, oh, you've been here once before, you can't come. You can go as many times as needed. But not only do you get the free bag of groceries, but also there's free clothing for both adults and children. That's right. You get free groceries and you get free clothing for yourself and your children. But wait, it doesn't stop there, because if you are there between the hours of 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., guess what else you also get? You get a free hot lunch. So that dispels the notion that there's no such thing as a free lunch, because if you go to 6812 Woodland Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio on the first or third Saturday of the month, and you're there between 11 a.m. and 1:30 p.m., you're going to get a free home-cooked hot lunch. Now, you can't beat that with a hockey stick, folks. And so when is that, you ask? The first and third Saturday of each month. What time, you ask? 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Where, you ask? 6812 Woodland Avenue in Cleveland, Ohio. And we want to commend both these following organizations. We want to commend the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. We want to commend We Care Ministries. And we also want to commend Williams Temple Church of God in Christ, who houses this event every first and third Saturday of the month. Mm-hmm. For those of you that are new to this show, this is what we do. We talk sports, we talk politics, we talk the issues of the day. I throw topics out on the table, and then I give my take on said topics, and then we invite you to call in with your take on those topics at 216-939-5087, 216-939-5087. Now, if you're a regular listener to the show, you know that when we have guests in studio, we cater that time to the field of expertise, so to speak, that guest is in. And we are honored to have with us today a very distinguished gentleman, one who is well known in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio and really across the country. And we are having studio with us the Honorable Mayor of Woodmere Village, Ohio, here in Northeast Ohio, and that's one Ben Holbert.
Appreciate that.
Mayor Holbert, welcome to the right side. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Thank you very much, Jeff. This is outstanding, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Well, we appreciate you being here. If you're a regular listener to the show, if the name, especially the last name, sounds familiar, if you were listening during our Women's History Month, and if you remember that broadcast that we had the first Saturday in the month, the Queens of Sports, where we had the round table, well, one of the guests on that show was our distinguished guest sister, and that's Brenda Holbert, but now we have Ben Holbert, Mayor of Woodmere Village, with us today. Ben, so let's get started right away here without any further ado. So just tell our audience, give our audience a little background. Who is Ben Holbert?
Oh my goodness, give you the elevator speech the best way I know how. Born and raised in the Cleveland area, graduated from Benedictine High School, went on to Kent State University, pursuing a degree in communications. Was rather fortunate to come out and to get a couple of positions in public television, a little bit in radio. There were internships, and then some in your audience may remember that WUAB TV plays favorites.
Channel 43.
Channel 43, but they started the first 10 o'clock news operation, and we actually went on air January 4th of 1988. Mm-hmm. And I was fortunate enough to be one of 5 reporters that were a part of that charter group of Channel 43 reporters. Mm-hmm. And so had a great time there. Worked pretty much in broadcasting field. WJMO was one of the locations as well, but I started in television on TV, pretty much came with WUAB. And I did that for a good period of time, and you know, sometimes the good Lord will tap you on your shoulder and say, all the plans that you had, those were nice, but I got something else in store for you.
Yes, he'll do that.
And he will. And what wound up happening, there was an opening or a position on Woodmere Village Council, and I ran, got elected, and the rest is history. That was, 6 years on council, and now I'm in my 5th year as mayor of the village of Woodmere.
Well, congratulations. Congratulations. If you have any questions for our guest, you can call in at 216-939-5087. And just a point of information for those of you who do not know, Mayor Holbert mentioned WJMO. At one time, WJMO was the, how should I say, especially if you're here in the Cleveland area now, and the station still exists, but it's not what it was. It was the central black-oriented radio station in Cleveland and Northeast Ohio during the 60s and a large part of the 70s. So, and did more than just play records. I had political awareness and everything that was going on there. So, as it reflected the times of that era. So, then when did you know that you wanted to be a broadcaster slash anchor?
Okay, good deal. I'm glad you said that, because I thought you were going to go into the other part, which about the politics.
Oh, we're going to get to that.
Oh my goodness! But no, actually, you know, following in the footsteps of my sister and my cousin, James Johnson, he went over to Kent State University, and he was interested in broadcasting. And honestly, at that point in my life in high school, I guess I would consider myself sort of bashful and shy, and really not one that was interested in anything in broadcasting on this side of the microphone. Now, if you put me on the other side where, you know, I was doing engineering or something like that, I was comfortable. But that's how this whole process sort of took place. Following Jimmy and following my sister over to Kent, took classes in broadcasting, sort of got the urge and the feeling that I really wanted to do this for a career. And the way that I actually got on air, that was sort of interesting because I was taking classes at a school called the Ohio School of Broadcast Technique. And there was a gentleman who came up to me, and and I don't mind saying this, he was our fair-skinned cousin, if you will. And so he made the comment to me. He said, you have a good speaking voice. You're a nice-looking guy. You're able to articulate and speak well. He said, you really need to think about going on the other side and being a DJ or in news. And when he first said it, because I'm not going into the great detail of how he said it, but again, if you understand when I say fair-skinned cousin, he was a white guy, and he's telling this black guy that you speak well. And so at first, you want to sit back and say, wait a minute, what are you talking about? But he was being genuine, and I think had it not been for Roger Carter making those comments, I probably would have stayed behind the scenes. But by that conversation, it propelled me to do things on camera. It propelled me to do things on the other side of the microphone. And when I was at WJMO, I was a midday news reporter. And then on the weekends, I did talk shows. And that was enough to bolster my resume that when Channel 43 opened up their news operation, I had enough on my resume to be able to get one of 5 slots.
That's great. So growing up, and especially when you got into the business, so to speak, who was or who were some of your role models?
Oh my gosh. Well, the name when I went to WJMO was Curtis Shaw. And Curtis was the general manager over there. So,
I remember him.
Oh my gosh, when I walked through the door and I'm hearing this gentleman's voice and seeing the whole WJMO operation, it was like, wow, I'm sitting here a part of this operation. And so that was exciting. But the other part was when I was a kid, believe it or not, I'd go out and deliver newspapers, and then I would come home and watch the news. And lo and behold, who would I see on the news was Leon Bibb. And so it was Leon Bibb and Bill Jaycox back in the day. And Bill Jaycox was on Channel 5 and Leon was on Channel 3. And when I would see Leon and I would say, my goodness, if he's able to do it, maybe one day I can. And how that all came to pass was when I can't remember what year I was at Kent, but something compelled me to reach out to Leon and ask him if I could come talk to him about broadcasting. He invited me down to Channel 3. During his lunch hour, we talked about television, we talked about broadcasting, we talked about me, and I was glad he took an hour of his time to do it. Lo and behold, a couple of days later, I get this letter in the mail, which is a recommendation letter from Leon Bibb.
Wow.
And I used that when I applied for the job at Channel 43.
Well, just to give some more information about the great Leon Bibb, when I was in school at the Ohio State University, Leon Bibb was the anchor on the NBC station in Columbus at that time. And then when I graduated and came back to Cleveland, he was here. So, I saw him both in Columbus and here. And at that time, especially in Columbus, he was the only black face, period, let alone anchor, that you saw on the news, on the right side of the news. We're going to talk about the stories, all right? But unfortunately, we saw a lot, and we're going to get to that in just a few minutes. But so yes, and class act, and all you hear are stories like what you just shared about Mr. Leon Bibb, and the great career he's had because he's not fully retired now. He still does things. So I'm just curious that when you got into the business and you started working at 43 and other places, did he remember that encounter?
Vaguely he did. It was because the thing about it, Leon has mentored so many people. It's not funny, and I bet you could probably fill up 2 or 3 or 4 rooms full of people who said that Leon touched them and helped them along the way. And every chance I get that I can give him his roses and flowers and thank yous, I always try to do it because once I got that position on Channel 43, I'm actually now working and competing against Leon
Right,
Bibb.
right.
And the thing that was sort of funny, because he was still at Channel 3 and I was at 43, but we go out on stories and, you know, I'm sitting there next to a gentleman that I would deem as my mentor. And, you know, we're trying to both break stories. And you know, and I do, Jeff, I need to mention this because one time I got a scoop that was significant. And Leon called me and congratulated me on that. He's working at the other station, but he congratulated me on this story that pretty close. I don't know if it had national implications, but throughout the state of Ohio, everybody was talking about this event. And the event involved George Forbes and Mike White. And so Mike White, for those in the audience who don't know, he was the former mayor of the city of Cleveland.
Yes.
But at that time, he was running for mayor, and George Forbes was running for mayor. And there was a story that we were able to break through my contacts, and no one else in the city had it except for, we had it on Channel 43, and Channel 8 had it at 6 o'clock, but we basically broke the story at 10 o'clock. So when Channel 8 did their story at 6, all the other stations in town were trying to recover, but before they could recover for 11 o'clock, here we come at 10 o'clock, and we had this story. So significant in the history of Cleveland.
You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure don't bring the noise. We have in studio with us the mayor of Woodmere Village, Ohio, Ben Holbert, also former news reporter and anchorman at various stations here in the Cleveland area. Ben, when 43 came in and with the news, what was unique, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that they had you and also they had a black woman by the name of Ramona Robinson on there.
Absolutely.
And I don't know how the rest of the black community in Cleveland and surrounding areas here in Northeast Ohio view that, but 43 was my station to watch because of that.
You know, and as I sit here now,
Not to mention I had a crush on her.
Oh,
But anyway, we're not going to talk about
I
that.
gotta tell you, you and about 30,000 other guys. So, but you know, when I sit here now and I think about it, we were at a cutting edge at
Yes.
Channel 43, and because Ramona was in that position to be the main anchor of a television station. At that point, it was her and the gentleman Bob Hetherington. But when we came in, we were pretty much deemed misfits, if you will. We were people that was sort of like a ragtag bunch. Nobody knew who Ramona was, even though she had worked in South Carolina and then came to Cleveland. Nobody knew who she was. And some of the other people, the real big name for Channel 43's 10 o'clock news was Gib Shanley. And
That's right, I forgot he was on there, yeah.
Gib was out in California, and Channel 43 was able to bring him back as the sports anchor. So he immediately garnered all that attention to make Channel 43 a station to watch. And you know, here we go. We got this ragtag bunch of folks, but we were making a difference. And I mentioned I have to tell this story too, but Curtis Shaw. When I was working at WJMO and I made the transition to 43, and God rest his soul, Curtis has gone on to his reward. But he told me, he said, you know, Ben Holbert, I don't know if this is a good move for you. You know, going to 43, you may be back because Channel 43 was the first 10 o'clock news operation in the state of Ohio, and nobody really knew if people would actually watch news at 10 o'clock. And what wound up happening is people started watching the news at 10 and going to bed at 11. And so we were an early alternative to getting your news about what was going on in the city of Cleveland. And at the beginning, when we started, you could see a fall off in the ratings from other stations because people started watching us.
Well, you're looking at one of the people that started watching you, so I can attest to that personally. So, what, in your opinion, today, as you look at the landscape today in 2023, even though you're no longer in the medium, so to speak, what are your thoughts regarding the state of black media today?
Great question again. I mean, I keep in touch with a number of people that work in media. I still participate in different groups, and whenever there's an opportunity to network, fellowship, or just be in the company of other people. The other day I was at a program in Danita Harris, Harry Boomer, Chris Fry. These are all the anchors current day and working in media. But it was like throwing a fish back into water. And, you know, whenever I can interact with them, it's always great. The state of black media, I, I, I think even when I was actively involved in the 80s and the 90s, and then early part of 2005. I think that was my last time, quote unquote, as a reporter. But I think we still have our struggles. I think sometimes it's difficult to be able for a reporter to be able to bring black and brown stories. It's improving, but it used to be a point in time we'd have a heck of a time trying to be able to go out and interview somebody who had unique skill set in a particular area, but they weren't deemed quote unquote the expert. So you know, you would try to go out and see if you could find a doctor that looked like us that we could interview, or a lawyer that looked like us, just so we could move that needle so people could see that black and brown people were also able to share information that was valuable for the community at large. And so I look back like Harry Boomer, Leon Bibb, those names that we keep dropping. But those folks, we worked hard to make sure that we had representation. And there used to be a point in time too that the only time that you saw black subject makers on television is when they had handcuffs on, being escorted, through the Justice Center or the police department. And we were trying hard to change that narrative. That was only a small smidgen of what took place in the black community. And for us as storytellers, we were trying to make sure that everybody could see that we have more to offer than simply that.
You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio, WMDS. We don't bring the static, but we sure bring the noise. We have in studio with us Ben Holbert. Ben, that is the perfect segue into my next question here, and that is this. Who makes the decisions
All right.
at television stations, locally or on the national level at networks? Who makes the decisions as to what stories are told and how they are told?
Great question again. People are under the impression that they see the reporter out there, and the reporter has found the story, and the reporter has gone out and covered the story, and now they're presenting it at 6, 5, 4, because the times now have just expanded. But typically what happens, you go into a morning meeting for those reporters working what we used to call dayside, and then what would happen is they would talk about the stories of the day, and then a producer or the news director, if he or she sat in on the meeting, would say, okay, Ben, I want you to go cover this story. And you really don't have a lot of input other than you go out and cover that story. One of the things, again, what we tried to do is at one point, because I was working alongside of Harry Boomer, but we would try to bring stories to those meetings and say, okay, you want me to go out here and cover, and I hope the audience doesn't mind me using these references, but you want me to go out and cover a story that took place out of Bay Village, soccer moms and this, that, and that.
Right.
It's all well and good. However, what if I bring you a story about something significant that's going on that took place at John F. Kennedy, that took place at East High back in the day, East Tech, kids doing these outstanding things. And I will tell you, oftentimes it was a struggle to get those stories done.
Absolutely.
But you gotta push. I look at it this way: if the good Lord put you in that position, don't relinquish your seat. Talk about it. Do the best you can. And you know, oftentimes I would get what we would call enterprise stories. And what would happen, Jeff, is I would get a phone call from somebody I went to high school with, somebody I grew up with in 131st and Miles area saying, you know, and I'll go and call it. They'll say, hey, Benji, because that's what people used to call me growing up.
Okay. I wasn't going to say
hey, Benji,
I was trying to give you your respect now, Mr. Mayor.
But it was true, and I would get a call from somebody, and they would tell me about something going on in the neighborhood, good, bad, or indifferent, and I would bring it to the news meetings, and sometimes I would get the stories done, sometimes I wouldn't. But they felt as though they had somebody there that could represent their interests.
Absolutely.
Just a point of information, Mayor Holbert and I go back a long way. His first cousins lived across the street from me in the Lee Harvard area. In fact, one of his first cousins is my best friend and one of the best men at my wedding. And I did know him as Benji, but you know I wasn't going to say that name on here. But I'm glad you brought that up though, because you know we see these stories. And prime example, I used to teach in the Cleveland Public Schools at John F. Kennedy High School, my alma mater. And I never will forget this, and I won't harp on this long because you know other things I want to get to during our time. But we had a job fair, career day, where we invited all these alumni back in various fields. We sent a press release information to all the stations, 358, 43, I don't think 19 was a station yet. 358 and 43, what have you, to the plain dealer. The press was gone by then, I believe, or they may still have been around, I can't remember. Anyway, long story short, no one showed up for the career day, no one. The very next day, the day after the career day, there was an incident in the school where a student became unruly, angry, and broke the glass out in the trophy case in the school, and the police were called to the school. We had reporters from 3, 5, 8, 43, and I think a beat reporter from the Plain Dealer was there. Now, I told them, I said, listen, I understand you are just doing your job, that, you know, your station told you to come out here. But I want you to know that we sent out a press release to all of you all. Tried to be professional. I didn't say all y'all, but I said all of you all. And not one person showed up at all. But now we have this, you know, this incident like this. Now all you all want to flock up here. And they said, sorry, we understand, but we're sorry we can only go where we're sent. So I just wanted to bring that. Now this was in the 80s.
Yeah, well, I got one.
I just brought that up just to prove what you just said.
I got one comparable to that. I was over, I believe I was a guest, but I went over to Collinwood High School where General Electric, I believe it was General Electric, but they gave a significant amount of money to the high school.
Mm-hmm.
In the newspaper, it was like on the back page, this, that, and the other, a little itty bitty blurb about it. However, later on that day, I guess, the police stopped a young man. They had their guns drawn, and they had the kid with his hands clasped behind his head, and the police pointing a gun. That was on the front page of the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and I'll never forget that. It just, you know, inside they're getting a significant amount of money to help the school, to help educate kids. But what was on the front page of the paper, somebody, a black young man with the gun being pointed to his head by the police. And it just, you know, those kind of things, those irk me, those make me, even when I was working in television, strive harder to make sure we tell the positive stories, or at least tell stories about our community that people can feel comfortable seeing.
That's right.
And it just, it bothered me to no end.
I understand it. And another great segue into the next question I have for you too is that you worked for the Cleveland Metropolitan School District from 2007 to 2008. Is public education in your opinion, is it in trouble right now? And if so, within a short period of time, what are some things that you think can be done to fix it?
Oh boy, I mean, we have a lot of challenges when it comes to public education. I mean, the amount of money that's being provided or spent on sounds like rain. Uh, but the amount of money that's being spent on kids in education, there may be X amount of dollars that is provided in public education in the Cleveland schools, but there's significantly more money in suburban areas.
Right.
So sometimes there's not really that equity that's there. You know, I also recognize that, you know, some of the kids that come to school each day, some are hungry, you know, so how do you study? Some, you know, you talked about food insecurity in the beginning of this program, but there's a lot of kids who don't have food, they don't have those role models at home. So all of these different things that just compromise the opportunity for them to be able to learn. And so I think people in my position, people, elected officials, we got to figure out some kind of way to make things better so everybody can get an equal education and opportunity to succeed in life. I wished I had the magic bullet right now to be able to tell you all we need to do is A, B, and C, and this is done. But I would say that it really needs the attention. And as we talk about education, one of the things that sort of bothers me is that we got to figure out a way to make schools safe.
Yes.
Kids should not have to worry about going to school and wondering, or parents sending their kids to school and wondering whether or not their kids are going to come home.
Right. Well, you know, Mayor Holbert, see, and I hate to sound like, hey, you kids get off my grass guy when I say this, but when you and I, when we went to school, the Cleveland Public Schools, you know, before you went to Benedictine, when I went to Grace Mount Elementary School, I did not, on the first day, have to get an active shooter drill.
Yes.
When I went to Charles Elliott, when I went to John F. Kennedy High School, the same. It breaks my heart because I've got a very close friend of mine who went to her granddaughter's first day of school, the 21-22 school year. And she told me that day, as sitting in the auditorium with the kids, the very first thing they did was what to do if there's an active shooter in the school. And we've had teachers on this show before. The answer is not arming the teachers. The answer is not putting armed security in the schools to make our schools look like prisons. And the answer is not, despite what Majority Leader Lambert in Tennessee said last week, is not putting a tank in front of every school either.
Yes.
We have a culture of gun violence in this country, as a matter of fact, that we're going to talk about that in the second hour. And that is the issue. We have elected officials who either do not have the courage of their convictions or are part of the problem to enact sensible gun legislation. We're not talking about taking everybody's weapons from them. But there is no reason that a private citizen should have a military weapon, which is what an AR-15 is.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree with you wholeheartedly. A friend of mine that I grew up with, his mother sent me a text message the other day, and I think Miss Baker's probably in her 70s at this point, maybe 80s. And she sent me a message knowing that, you know, I'm serving as mayor, but she said something's got to be done. And then she sends me this video of what a bullet, when it goes inside the body, what kind of destruction. And she says this is happening to our children.
exactly.
Our kids are being fired upon by somebody who has an ulterior motive, who maybe have some mental challenges, but whatever the case, they fired a weapon in a school and they're killing our kids. And somebody has got to figure out some kind of way that it's more important to make sure our kids are safe in school as opposed to protecting, if you will, a gun lobby. You know, there are going to be people in your audience, there are going to be people all over the place who say, hey, I have the right to bear arms and have a firearm and this, that, and the other. Yeah, but you don't have the right to be able to go into a school and spray the place and kill kids.
Exactly. And you know, we talked about this on the show last week that the number one thing that is killing children now, it used to be car accidents.
Mm-hmm.
And so the government, seeing that, put legislation that children had to wear seatbelts and babies had to be in car seats and harnessed and what have you. So they enacted that legislation, and lo and behold, I'm being very sarcastic here, now the numbers dropped of children dying in car accidents. But now it's been replaced. The number one killer of children in America now is gun violence. And I could, but I want, there's so many other things I want to get to you on before our time is up, so I don't want to harp too much on that, and especially since we're going to be talking about that in the second hour too. But you also at one time worked for the Census Bureau.
Yes.
Do you think people of color are being undercounted or their accounts are being misrepresented, I should say? And if so, what is the cause of that? Is it that people aren't filling it out correctly, or
no? I think it's a distrust. It's a distrust in government, and you know, when I worked for the Census Bureau, and I worked twice, the 2010 census. The 2000 census and the 2010 census, and we had training on how to overcome the objections of people who say, "Oh no, I'm not filling out that census form because if I do that, then the government knows where I'm going to live." Well, quite honestly, they already know. They already know.
Do you do tax forms? Come on. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, you're absolutely right. If the government wants to find you, they can find you. You know, it may take them a little bit longer than another person, but the census is protected. Matter of fact, I'm still bound, even though I worked as a census. It was basically a specialist, a media specialist for them, and partnership specialist was another position I had. But we're bound. We can't divulge any information about anything that we may have retrieved when we did the census. Now, I was not a census taker. I was more in an administrative role trying to promote and market it. But still, we have to sign a form to say that we're not going to divulge any information. And if we do, we're subject to a $250,000 fine and imprisonment. So, but the biggest thing is when people are not counted in the census, your community loses money. And I believe it's like $18,000 per person for every person who is not counted in the census. That's how much money your community loses.
Exactly. Wow. That's why I brought it up, because I wanted someone other than me, someone who has some expertise in the field and worked in it, to say exactly what Mayor Holbert just said. So even though it's every 10 years, folks, please, it's so much simpler now. It's all you have to do. If you have a computer, just go online, you can get it done, and really, truly, in less than a minute or so.
Exactly. And, you know, a lot of the information that you provide for the census is pretty much, and I'll use the term embargoed, for 70 years, if you will. So, you know, there are some people now who are getting alerts on Ancestry.com, and it's showing that, you know, their grandparents or whatnot, it shows where they live. I'm getting it now. My grandmother, I found out what street she lived on in Shelbyville, Tennessee.
Wow.
You know, and it's based off of, it was 70 years going into the past. That's when they're starting to release this information. But, you know, for anybody, you know, if my voice has any influence, when it's time to fill out the census, in the 2030 census, please do it.
Yes.
You know, you need to do it because it's so important.
Because what it does, and people, what you folks, we need to understand is that your city services are based on that.
Yep.
So many things that affect your community are based on that, and where tax dollars and appropriations are going to be sent to or set aside to. If you're undercounted, you're not going to get it. It's as simple as that. And So it's important. It's vital.
Yeah, and one of the things we tried to do during the, because I was in office during the 2020 census, but we were trying to go out and encourage everybody in Woodmere. Woodmere is a small community, but we needed to make sure that everyone was counted. And unfortunately, when we got the data back from the Census Bureau, we roughly had 60% of our residents filled out the census form. 60%. So those other 40 that are out there who didn't fill it out, now you have to have a census taker come and knock on your door, and if you don't open the door, then basically you're not counted.
Exactly.
And so, true. And Woodmere could use every penny we can get.
That you could. And that leads now to the $64,000 question, so to speak. What inspired you to have the career change from broadcast journalism, being an anchor reporter, to transition into the field of politics?
Okay, there were a couple of things that happened, and just being very transparent, upfront, and honest about broadcasting. You can work at a television station and be a popular reporter. You can work at a television station and be a very proficient reporter. But if there's new management that comes in, if there's a new news director that comes in and they want to bring their people in, then you're on the bubble. And unfortunately, that happened to me once in my career, actually twice in my career. I was working at, I'm not going to call the station's name, but I was working at the station, and this individual came in, and seven of us were let go all at the same time. And I mean, these folks were significant. I thought that they were very good. Matter of fact, there's some people that sometimes you may see on a national stage that work the channel. Well, I'm not going to call the name of the station. I almost did it. But they're now doing national stuff. But the news director or the management at that time, escorted you out. So to fast forward ahead, how I got into this realm of politics really, and I do deem it as being a public servant. But I always tell this story, and I got to tell it again today. There was a lady, I was out in my yard doing yard work, and one of my neighbors came up to me, and she reminds me of in the opening credits for Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, where, telling him that he had to go live with his auntie and his uncle. Mm-hmm. Well, that's how she was doing me. She said, you need to go up there and see what's going on in Woodmere Village. No, these people are doing this, they're doing that. And so pretty much to stop her from persisting, I just said, okay, I'll go. So I went to a council meeting. Now, granted, as a reporter, I was covering Cleveland City Council, East Cleveland. I was covering all these and school board meetings, but this was really my first time going to a Woodmere Village council meeting. And when I got up there, I was saddened to see that they were not really performing the work of the village. They were fighting each other, and it was sad. And so at the end of the meeting, they have a session where the public can speak. And I just told them, I said, quite honestly, folks, and I mean this with all sincerity, this was embarrassing to watch you all. So then after I make this statement, then I go home and I start thinking, can I make a difference? So I ran for a council seat because I was in transition from television. So it wouldn't have been appropriate for me to be a reporter and also be a council person. But I went on, ran for council, and got elected. And to my surprise, the first 6 months, I was like, I don't know why I did this. This is great, because they continued to have the gnashing of the teeth and the fighting, but we were able to transition to get people to start working together. And the next year, each year you select a council president. And I told this other lady that I was going to support her, and she says, no, I'm going to support you. And next thing I know, I wind up becoming council president. And so I did that for 5 years, and I'll stop at this point if you want to ask any questions on there, but.
Well, yeah, and in fact, yes, we do. So I wanted to ask you, once you became mayor, now, for those of you that are outside of Northeast Ohio that are listening to this, so Woodmere Village is a small suburb of a southeast suburb of the city of Cleveland. but I'm sure it has its unique challenges. What are some of the challenges that you face on a daily basis as mayor of Woodmere Village?
Well, there's the pros, the cons, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The great thing about Woodmere, we're a small community geographically, but we have 300 businesses and they're upscale. We have the Apple Store, we have Trader Joe's.
That's all in Eaton Square.
All in Eaton, and we just got one of the first smaller footprint Targets back in November. So it and our location, we're right off the highway, so we get a lot of people coming from all over Northeast Ohio to patronize our businesses. And we have one of two Tiffany jewelry stores in Eaton and Woodmere. So I would deem it to be an upscale retail operation. Now, some of the drawbacks sometimes, and what I've learned in 5 years and then 6 years with council is, when you make statements, sometimes those statements can come back and knock on your door and beat you up a little bit.
I bet they could.
They can, but honestly, I think sometimes drawbacks are people lacking vision. I want to plant a seed that grows a tree that somebody else is going to be able to enjoy the shade. And sometimes you have to do some difficult things. You have to sit down and really sit down and talk with the good Lord before you make a decision. But you gotta stay with your convictions. And there have been times where I've done things that I know people don't particularly care for my sentiment or how I do it. But I feel, like I said earlier, if the good Lord tapped me on the shoulder and put me in this place, I can't relinquish my seat. I can't relinquish my obligation as mayor. And I'm term limited. So in 2 years and 8 months, I'm done. So during this time, I'm going to do everything I possibly can to make Woodmere Village a better place for the people who live there, Northeast Ohio, state of Ohio, and in the country.
And not to discount Woodmere Village at all with this question. I wish there was another way I could frame it. This is the only way I know how to frame it. Are there bigger fish to fry for Ben Holbert politically? Once this term is up, what does the political future of Ben Holbert hold?
Great question, and I get that a lot. And honestly, I don't know. And I've talked to different people. Matter of fact, I was involved with a program called Leadership Cleveland, and it's a very competitive situation where you apply, and a number of people who apply don't get accepted. Well, I got accepted, and it's basically leaders in business, government, nonprofits. They come together and try to find solutions, if you will, for the issues impacting Cleveland. So, I'm in this role with Leadership Cleveland, and we finished up our program the other day. We were in Pittsburgh, and I had about 5 of my classmates ask me, "What are you going to do after you're done as mayor?" And I don't want to say that I don't know, but honestly, I don't know. I think that the good Lord, once again, in some shape, form, or fashion, going to tap me on the shoulder and order my steps to go in whatever direction that's going to be. Yes. But as we sit here right now, I know unless something changes with the Village of Woodmere charter, I'm done as mayor in 2 years and 8 months. So I run as hard and as fast as I possibly can and do as much stuff as I can do. And when using a baseball analogy, when I'm done, I'm not just going to throw my glove out there. I'm going to leave it all on the field. And when December 31st of 2025 rolls around, I will be able to hand over the keys to the kingdom of Woodmere to somebody else and say, "You got all that's in here." That's it. And I don't know what's next. But if you do, please let me know.
I don't know. I'll put it like this: I'll be keeping an eye on you to see exactly where you'll be going, where God will be leading you to. One of the disappointment I'll say is I used to love the restaurant Bravo out there. I was so sad. I didn't even know they had closed. I went out there one day. A friend of mine, matter of fact, he has a program on this station as well, Al Bridges. and we were meeting for lunch one day, and I said, well, let's go to Bravo's. And so he knew it had closed. He went to Legacy Village, and I went to the one out on Chagrin in the Eden Village. I'm like, what happened?
Yes, sir. I mean, that sometimes, we become aware of different things before the public, and, you try to negotiate, you try to keep them there, but in the situation of Bravos and Fleming's, because now there's a new steakhouse.
I forgot about Fleming's.
Fleming's, it popped up in the middle of the night and they were gone. And I don't mind saying this too. We had a major finance company, or not finance, but it was called Lincoln Financial, and middle of the night they packed up and they left.
Wow.
But what we were been able to do is I'm calling people, I'm working with people, I get phone calls, and we just provided an tax incentive or grant, as we call it, to a company to move in there, and it's another CPA firm to take the place of where Lincoln Financial left. Mm-hmm. So
okay. Well, the joke I tell people about your village is that make sure that you, when it says 35, that you're going 35. Mm-hmm. Don't go 36 or 37 because you'll get a friendly little reminder from the village of Woodmere that you should not be going 36 or 37 miles an hour. So I know that, but I've seen many people who don't know that. They get pulled over, and I just say, oh well, now you know.
I got a funny one, if I could, 30 seconds on this. We went to Washington, D.C., a group of mayors, and while we were there, we were meeting with Sherrod Brown. So we're going around the room introducing who's what mayor of what community. So I said, I'm Ben Holbert, mayor of the village of Woodmere. And Sherrod Brown stops. He said, wait a minute. I got a speeding ticket there one time.
Oh, wow.
I said, it wasn't under my administration, Senator. It might have been somebody else, but it wasn't mine.
Is Wayne Yates still the police chief?
No, actually, we have two females. We have a female police chief and a female fire chief.
Wow.
Okay. So the women are leading our safety forces.
Well, you've been listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we should not bring the noise. We have been privileged to have in studio with us our first hour mayor, Ben Holbert, mayor of the village of Woodmere here in Northeast Ohio. Mayor Holbert, thank you so much for coming on, and it was a very enlightening time that we had here, and I wish you the best in your future endeavors. In our second hour of the program today, or after we come back after the break at the top of the hour, we're going to talk about the tragedy of the fear and guns rather, here in America, and how the media has whipped certain segments of the population into this frenzy of fear, and we've seen it with tragic results over the last week in upstate New York, in Texas involving the cheerleaders, and in Kansas City involving the 16-year-old young man there. We're also going to look at this. I've got a surprise. We hear so much, especially from certain right-wing media sources, about Democrat-led cities that are just full of crime and violence. So I've got some surprise statistics that may shock you to show you exactly what states have the highest incidence of gun violence and murders in this country. You'd be surprised to hear that, and we're also going to do our Hero and Zero of the Week in the second hour. This is Mayor Holbert. Thank you once again, and we're so glad to have you. And we'll be right back with you after these announcements with the second part of our show.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate it.
Have you, a family member, or friend been affected by violence? Know that violence can affect all parts of your life, sometimes in ways you can't see. Violence can affect the way you eat, sleep, it causes you to lose focus, feel angry, afraid, or even use drugs or drinking as a way to escape. But we're here to tell you that violence doesn't have to keep hurting, and you can change your life starting now with help from the Trauma Recovery Center. We want you to take control of your life because today can be the day. The Trauma Recovery Center offers real help for real needs in real time. They offer services for food, clothes, safety, emotional support, and a whole lot more. So listen, don't let violence control you. You can break free, and TRC can help. Give them a call if you're listening. If you're watching, the numbers on the screen, 216-644-5487. They will come to you wherever you are. They are free, 24/7, and confidential. They can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. They can give you the tools to rebuild your life and your health. Call today. They're free, they're 24/7, and they're confidential. 216-644-5487. So look, if you want out and don't know where to start, call the Trauma Recovery Center. The Trauma Recovery Center will help you take back your life after violence starting today. Call today. Get the help you need today. If you call today, they'll respond immediately. 216-644-5487. The Trauma Recovery Center of Northeast Ohio, also affiliated with the Center for Families and Children. And now, back to Jeff Doggett in the right side.
Thank you, Marie. Before we get started on our second hour, for those of you that, if you are new to this station, this is your first exposure, let me just give you the lineup of shows here on this station, here on WMDS, No Static Radio, Contemporary Talk, and so much more. On Mondays, our theme on Mondays is Murder Mind Day Monday. We have Black Anthology on from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. The host of that show is Coffee, great show. We have from 2 to 4 on Monday, Hustle and Wax Flow, and that is hosted by Gerald Saloon and also Mr. Carter. That show deals with sports and the topics of the day. Then in the evening, we have the drag racing, the ultimate sports show from 5:30 p.m. to 5 p.m., hosted by a married couple, Ken and Denise Kennedy. All right? It's more than meets the eye. Just tune in and listen to that. So that's our Motor Mind Mondays, if you will. And then on Tuesdays, and then from 7 to 9, we have More Than Meets the Eye, is what I meant to say. That's from 7 to 9 p.m. on Monday, and that's hosted by Noble Khan Bay. And so that's our Mondays. Then on Tuesday, we have what's called Testimony Tuesday. We have Body Talk, one of the premier shows on this station. I say all the time when I listen to it, it's like listening to 60 Minutes on the radio. That comes on from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. That's hosted by Al Bridges. Then we have the Tuesday Gospel Music Show, so that you can get your praise on. Always a good time to get your praise on no matter when, but listen from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. That's hosted by the Reverend Doctor. Then on Wednesday, we have House Party Wednesday, Lupus Straight Up with Cece, and that's all from 2 p.m. to 4 p.m., hosted by Celia and JJ. Then Speakeasy Radio Show from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., hosted by Ron, and not the R-O-W-N, but R-A-W-N, Christian. Chilston, Ron Chilston, 6 to 8 p.m. Then on Thursdays, we call it Turn Up Thursdays on No Static Radio. We have the Rap Show, RAP show hosted by Ryan A. Polk. That's on from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. Then we have the Warrior, the Solomon Paulk radio show, every Thursday from 7 p.m. to 9 p.m. Then we jump to Fridays, Fantastic Fridays. From 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. we have FAN radio show hosted by Kiana and Guy. Then we have Welcome to the BBW, the Big Beautiful Women show, hosted by Stacy Stacks. Then we turn the calendar over in the week to Saturday. We call it Situation Saturdays from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. We have a No Static Radio veteran manning the airways at that time, and that show is Pumping It Up with Will. Our host is Will Childs. So listen, if you're in the bodybuilding and getting yourself in shape, check out Pumping It Up with Will. You can learn a lot of techniques about bodybuilding and how to get in shape. All of us need to get in shape. So check that show out. Then we have the entertainment plug from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. hosted by J-Rock and CC. And then preceding this show from 1 to 3 p.m., we have Real Talk with Reese. And she gets real, folks. For real, she gets real. She's on from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m., and that's hosted by Tania Thomas, a.k.a. Reese. And then from 3 to 5 every Saturday, you have The Right Show, Right Side, hosted by yours truly. So there's our lineup each week. And I'm sure that there's something in there that appeals to all of your interests, as we have a variety of programming here on this station. So support the programming on the station, and especially if you see it on YouTube, click like and share it with those. If you like the show, then click like and share it with those who you consider friends and people that are close to you, so that it can get more exposure. So there you have it, and we're glad that you're with us, and we hope then that you continue to listen to us. So in our second hour, and if you have any comments or questions or takes on anything that we're going to talk about in the second hour, I don't know, Maria, are the phones, are they open where people can call in?
They are. With nobody's called today for us to know for sure, but they can definitely call.
Okay, so if you have any comments on what we're going to be talking about here in the second hour, or if you have any comments on the guest that we had in the first hour, then please feel free to call us at 216-939-5087. If you have a take on what we're going to throw out here on the table here in just a moment, then we'd love to hear from you. But in the second hour, the first thing that we want to deal with is this. What we call the tragic results of fear in a heavily armed society. The tragic results of fear in a heavily armed society. Now, you may be thinking, well, what are you talking about, Jeff? What tragic results of fear in a heavily armed society? Well, there is a movement in the media, specifically on more right-wing media type networks and programs, if you will, to paint a portrait and a picture of America, of one that is just rampant with crime, rampant with violent crime, a very dangerous very dangerous place to live, that your life is always in danger. And you see these stories, you see the stories of the teenagers in Chicago who went on a rampage and were smashing windows along the businesses along the Magnificent Mile, or you see others stories of heinous crimes and what have you, and the picture is being painted, if you will, that America is a very fearful place to live. America is a place where you can literally lose your life anytime you step out of the door, especially if you go into certain areas in major metropolitan cities in America. Your life is in danger, and your life is always in danger. Now, is there some truth to that? Well, maybe. I mean, you can lose your life anywhere you go. And oh, by the way, it doesn't necessarily have to be in the so-called inner city or the so-called slums or what have you, because we see murders and violence take place in all aspects of American society. But there seems to be this move, especially as I said, among right-wing media sources that paint this picture to a constituency or to a demographic, if you will, who's already in fear and who's already heavily armed, and now has made it where they're at the point where they have a hairpin finger, trigger finger, if you will. For example, my good old buddy, and I say that tongue placed firmly in cheek, but my good old buddy Tucker Carlson, or as Tuckums, as I call him on here, if you're a familiar listener to this show, Tuckums ran a story on his show earlier this past week, showing the as I said, the young people in Chicago who. Now listen, let me say this first. Now I'm not condoning what they did, and I'm not defending what they did. All right, so let's get that out here right away. But Tuckums on his show showed a segment of these young people, African American black youth, on a rampage, if you will, in downtown Chicago along the Magnificent Mile, smashing out windows in high-priced jewelry stores and stealing jewelry and other stores, looting. And then he made this comparison. He made this comparison that Chicago and other major cities in America are turning into Mogadishu. He compared Chicago to Mogadishu in this piece. Now, for those of you who don't know, Mogadishu is in Somalia, all right? And, there's been civil war going on in Somalia for years. And he tried to compare what's going on, or that incident in Chicago. He tried to paint the picture that Chicago is America's version of Mogadishu. And so, since Fox News and Newsmax and One America Network caters to a certain demographic, if you will, and that demographic is usually right-wing MAGA-type Republicans, all right? That is the demographic that they program to, so much so that Fox willingly and knowingly aired lies over their network about the Dominion voting machines and the Smartmatic voting machines being rigged, which then supposedly cost former President Trump the election, and they knew that it was a lie. And the reason that they did that is that Fox, and just giving you information you already know, just to paint the picture here, if you will, the reason that Fox did that is that Fox, rightfully so, was the first network, before MSNBC, the so-called liberal left network, before CNN, the so-called centrist network, before ABC, NBC, CBS, etc., on the election night in 2020, before any of those major networks declared Arizona, rightfully so, by the way, for President Biden, Fox was first. And immediately when they did it, they faced a huge backlash from their viewership. And so to save their financial bottom line, if you will, because they were going to losing viewers to Newsmax and One America Network, who bought into the big lie, bought into the conspiracies that were never true in the first place. to gain that audience back, they knowingly allowed people to come on their network and lie and say that Dominion voting machine systems and Smartmatic voting machines had flaws in them where they deliberately counted votes for Joe Biden that were really Trump votes. Now, they knew all along this wasn't true. And the reason that we know that is that the Dominion lawsuit brought this out in their lawsuit. And Fox had to settle out of court this week for a record $787.5 million settlement paid to Dominion. And now Smartmatic is in line now to sue Fox for defamation as well. And they're going to get a huge payout as well. So I just needed to tell you all of that in case you didn't know what was going on, to allow you to see why, and it's just not Fox, it's also One America, it's also Newsmax that are doing these same things. Why they are doing this. They are, if you will, broadcasting to a certain segment, a certain demographic that they want to push, to continue to push this agenda, to continue to push this victimization agenda, if you will, because it's all lined up with former President Donald Trump, who they're trying to get back in his good graces. As we talked about here on the show last week, Tucker Carlson did an interview with Donald Trump a week ago or so, where Donald Trump spoke glowingly and admiringly of leaders such as Xi Jinping of China, Kim Jong-un of North Korea, and also Vladimir Putin of Russia. We talked about that on the show last week. And they're doing this to cater to this demographic. What is the danger of this? When you constantly show and when you constantly slant stories to try to paint a picture that these people are violent and you need to protect yourself, it then strikes fear in the demographic that they are catering to, who has a victimization mentality anyway, because they're being fed that by their leader, former President Donald Trump. And what does this lead to? Well, it leads to tragic events that we saw in 3 different localities in this country last week that got considerable news coverage, and rightfully so. First one I want to talk about is the shooting, if you will, in Kansas City that took place a week ago Thursday, where a 16-year-old boy by the name of Ralph Yarl was shot in the head and in the shoulder in Kansas City. 16-year-old young black boy who was sent by his mother. And let me just say this. If he was, it still wouldn't have made it right. But this was not a, quote, thuggish, unquote, appearing young man. He wasn't some drug dealer. He wasn't some high school dropout. He wasn't any of these things. He was a honor student in his school who aspired to become a chemical engineer, wanted to go to Texas A&M, I believe it was. I think that was the college he wanted to go to, but I'm not sure. It kind of escapes me right now as what college he wanted to go to, but I believe it was Texas A&M, who was well liked by all of his fellow students, black and white, was a section leader in the marching band at his high school. Okay, so we're talking about a model type of student, if you will. Again, it wouldn't have made it right if he was not that kind of student, but I want just to paint the accurate picture here of this young man, George Yarl. As I said, he was sent by his mother to go to the home of the babysitter to get his siblings and to bring them home. And so he goes to the neighborhood. His mother gave him the address, but he went on the wrong street. How many of us have done that before?
Yeah.
When we're unfamiliar with the neighborhood and we think we're on the right street, but we're not. I know I've done that several times in my life, even here recently. He went up to the door of the address that he thought was the correct address and knocked on the door. And the owner of the home, the resident, I should say, of that home, came to the door, and instead of saying, "Yes, young man, what is it that you want, or who are you looking for, or anything of that nature," what he did is that he came to the door and he shot him twice. Shot him once in the shoulder and once in the head. The person who shot him was an 84-year-old man, white man by the name of Andrew Lester. Now, let me just give you this information about Mr. Lester that you may or may not have heard about in the news media. Mr. Lester's grandson, whose name is Clint Ludwig, said, and I quote, that his grandfather holds racist tendencies and beliefs and has made racist statements in the past. He also said that his grandfather watched Fox News, the Fox News cycle, almost 24 hours a day. Well, I don't know if he meant 24 hours a day, but he watched the Fox News cycle over and over again throughout the day, and that it created, now these are the words of the grandson. These aren't the words of host of the right side, Jeff Doggett, speaking. These are the words of the grandson, who you would figure would know his grandfather, said that the Fox News cycle that his grandfather watched created, quote, a cycle of fear and paranoia in his grandfather. So, you have this grandfather watching Fox News cycle over and over again. Again, I gave you the example of Tucker Carlson comparing the city of Chicago to Mogadishu. You have the grandson of the perpetrator of this violent act in Kansas City saying that his grandfather had racist tendencies and beliefs to start with, has made racist statements. This is the grandson saying this. And then you have Fox News feeding into, fanning these flames, if you will, creating this cycle of fear and paranoia with stories and with commentary like Tucker Carlson and what he said about the city of Chicago. So here comes this young man, as I said, 16-year-old honor student, no criminal record, not a drug dealer, not a gangbanger, didn't walk up with a hoodie on, didn't walk up with his, baggy pants down below his waist, none of these things. And again, if he had approached the door like that, it still does not make it right. I don't want anybody out here to get it twisted, saying that, well, if he looked a different way, the man was justified in what he did. The boy did not even threaten the young man, Mr. Pearson, didn't even threaten him. Just simply knocked on his door. And when he knocked on his door, his response was immediately to shoot him. Now, his reasoning for this is that he said that he was afraid, that he thought that this was somebody trying to break into his house. Silent pause there on purpose, because I want that to register with you. His response, Mr. Pearson's response, was that he thought that this was somebody trying to break in his house. Huh? What? Because he knocked on your door? You mean to tell me if somebody knocks on your door, they're trying to break into your house? He wasn't jimmying the lock. He wasn't jimmying or trying to open the door with the handle. All he simply did was knock on the door. But because he is consumed with watching this news cycle, that is consumed with trying to get the message out here that America is a place of fear, that there are certain segments of the American society that you need to fear and have paranoia about because they are getting this narrative out there, if you will. Then this man, this 84-year-old man, sees a 16-year-old black male come up to his door, and he's been watching this loop over and over again of what happened in Chicago and hearing the stories from Tucker Carlson and others on that network that he depends on to give him his information, misguided as it is, but nonetheless, that's who he's depending on. And to no one's surprise, this is what happens. This is what happens. Now, fortunately, and I thank God for this, fortunately, this young man did not die. However, the reason that he didn't die is that the bullet did not hit him in the area that would have caused a fatality. Had it been, I think they said maybe just about an inch or so in another direction, that he would have died. There would have been no doubt about this. Now, his mother, I'm talking about George Yarl's mother, his mother went on CBS Mornings, and one of the hosts on CBS Mornings is Gayle King. You know her. She's a friend of Oprah Winfrey. She's a host on CBS Mornings. And she and his mother said that this 16-year-old boy is traumatized. Well, of course he would be. She said that he is traumatized and that he is repeatedly playing this attack over and over again in his mind. I can't even imagine it. And by the way, after he was shot and he crawled away from the house of Mr. Pearson and went to a neighbor's house and knocked on the door, do you know that the neighbor wouldn't even come out to him, wouldn't open the door, wouldn't even come out? Now, it came out later that 911 advised the neighbor not to do this, which is kind of puzzling to me. Any of you that are 911 dispatchers, please call in 216-939-5087. Maybe you can explain that. So, but the neighbor did at least call the first responders so that this young man could be taken to the hospital and administered to. And as I said, thank God he's at home now. He's at home recuperating. But can you imagine the effect that this is going to have on him for the rest of his life, to know that all he did was simply go up to a door and knock on a door? But because we live in a society now that is, especially certain aspects of it, have been pumped by the media that they are consuming, that they are to fear that this incident even happened.
If I might interject, Jeff, the unfortunate part about a neighbor finally helping is they only helped after they made him roll over on his stomach and hold his hands up.
Right. Yes, that's true. That's so true. But to show you that this not just doesn't happen to young black males or females, to show you where this fear and paranoia has gotten us, and this gun violent and this gun crazy society that we live in, which, by the way, when we hear of incidents, we always hear about the mental health aspect. Well, the shooter of George Yard, Mr. Pearson, has never been diagnosed as being mentally ill. Okay? He's never been diagnosed as that. There was a 20-year-old, young white female, 20-year-old, by the name of Kaylin Gillis. Kaylin Gillis and 3 of her friends had gone to a remote area in upstate New York looking for a friend's house. This was a week ago today. All these incidents we're talking about, we're not talking about things that happened months ago. This was a week ago today, last Saturday. Kaylin Gillis and 3 friends were in a car in upstate New York in a very rural area of upstate New York. And they were looking for a friend's house. And they pulled into the wrong driveway. And they realized that they had pulled into the wrong driveway. Now, mind you, they didn't get out of the car. They weren't walking around the property. As I said, they never even exited the vehicle. They never went to the door. They realized when they pulled in the driveway that they were in the wrong driveway. Simple mistake, right? Simple mistake. Again, something I'm sure all of us have done. At least I know I've done. I pulled into the wrong driveway, sometimes going to someone's house I'd never been to before. Sometimes I've done it on purpose because due to my vision, it's hard for me to see addresses from the street. So sometimes I pull into the driveway so I can see the address so I can know where I'm at.
Right.
All right?
Right.
Harmless. These people never got out the car, folks. And you know what happened to Miss Gillis? Well, what happened to Miss Gillis, when her and her friends were backing out of the wrong driveway, a 65-year-old man by the name of Kevin Monahan fired 2 shots from his porch into the vehicle, and one of those bullets took the life of this 20-year-old young woman. Young woman was not threatening him. The people in the vehicle were not threatening him. His life was not in danger. His property was not in danger. His family was not in danger. None of that. He fired from his porch into a vehicle that had come into his driveway, fired 2 shots, and killed this 20-year-old woman. Now, he's been charged. He's been charged with murder there, and, I'm not certain if he's out on bond or not. Of course, trial has not been taking place as the incident is too recent to take place. But now here's a family that has to mourn, has to bury their daughter, sister, niece. Welcome to the Right Side, caller. State your name and where you're calling from.
Yes, good afternoon, Jeff. My name is Al. I'm calling from Cleveland, Ohio.
Hello, Al. What's on your mind?
Yeah, first let me compliment you on the Ben Holbert interview. Excellent questions and excellent guest.
Thank you.
Also to your topic about the media and the guns issue. It's rather strange now. We've gone into this new, let's say, century where you have the media is going to continue and has always painted a picture for people. Either it's going to be against another culture, against another gender, against another country. But more so because of the guns, everybody has a gun. Everybody now. You're living in states where it's stand your ground. And let's just go backwards here with the young lady. I believe she was a cheerleader in upstate New York.
No, that was the cheerleaders in Texas. I was going to get to that, but no, go ahead. Go ahead.
Okay, well, the young lady in New York. I'm sorry. Thanks for the correction. She was white.
Yes.
And she was shot by another white person.
Correct.
The young man, the black teenager, was shot by a white man, and I can't say he wasn't racist. I did hear his grandson's description of his grandfather, which was rather sad.
Mm-hmm.
But if you have networks such as the Fox or whatever network it might be, they're going to paint a picture of sensationalism, may it be good or bad. And I think we live in this country now, where everybody is afraid of somebody else.
That's true.
Regardless if you look like me, if you're black, or if you're white, or whatever. And we just reached the point, and you mentioned the incident in Chicago. And if you're not aware, the current mayor, Lightfoot, said, well, These are just kids being kids. If I'm a resident of Chicago, again, I'm not trying to say that the teenagers should have been handcuffed, arrested, and beaten in the street. That's not what I want to hear from the quote unquote chief law enforcement officer in the city of Chicago. So people across this country are arming themselves to defend themselves because they're afraid. And just a quick analogy, and I'll let you go. If you go back to 9/11, the majority of the people in this country became afraid of the boogeyman. I'm just going to, I named Bin Laden boogeyman. So we became fearful of somebody who might have been a Muslim, who might have been from the Middle East, or whatever the case might be. And it's going to take decades for us to get over this fear of each other. Guns are more prevalent than they were, let's say, in the 60s and 70s, but guns have always been around. But now everybody has a gun. And most people who are afraid react or act too quickly without thinking about what the consequences are, such as the young lady, such as the young man, and you'll mention, I want to take your soundbite from you, but the situation in Texas. So the question is, how do we overcome the fear?
Well, to your point about everybody having guns, there's roughly 350 million people that live in the United States of America, and the last count I saw was that there were 401 million guns in this country, which means that there are more guns than there are people in this country. And when you couple that with the fear, as you said, and then you have networks like Fox, like One American Network, One American News, rather, and like Newsmax, etc., fanning the flames, if you will, and especially when they're portraying certain demographics, then that exacerbates the problem even more. One thing, I'm glad you mentioned Lori Lightfoot, and I'm going to say this and I want to hear your response to it. I saw something today. I was watching CNN this morning, and Lori Lightfoot, and I almost did the Fred Sanford when I heard this statement. I'm coming to join you, honey. That thing. That she made a statement that if Democratic mayors don't start addressing the problem of crime and violent crime in our cities, then they're going to lose their hold, or they're going to lose their positions in various cities. And when I saw that was her who said this, the statement that you just repeated that she said came to mind, along with some other things. As a matter of fact, the host of the show, Smirkamish, even said perhaps if she would have campaigned on this, she would not have lost her primary election when she didn't even make it out of the primary to get to the general election in Chicago.
Well, in response to that, Jeff, I'm going to do this really quick. Separate from politics, the issue of addressing crime has swung way to the left. It's too liberal now. That's not associated with being a Democrat. It needs to come back to the middle. I'm going to call it the hug and kisses of people who break the law. Seem to be, well, it's okay, we'll give them a second, third, and 20th chance. There was a recent case here in Cleveland where one of the judges let a 15-year-old young man go, and he had carjacked 4 people with guns, and the fifth or fourth one, he actually shot this woman twice. And fortunately, she lived. But the judge, in lieu of waiting for sentencing, she sent this young man home on a bracelet, an ankle bracelet. And as the date got closer for him to be sentenced, to return to court, he actually cut the bracelet off, And the U.S. Marshals Police Department, whoever, just recently apprehended him. Unfortunately, he wasn't killed. If we go back and discuss this gun issue, and again, you have 13, 14, 15-year-old people, kids out here with guns now.
Yes, you do.
And I hope nobody in your home who's listening has ever had a gun pointed at them by anybody. A 13-year-old pointing a gun at you can kill you or seriously wound you. So at what point do, and again, I think it goes back to what I mentioned earlier, it goes back to the fear thing. Now, granted, the young man who knocked on the wrong door, that man should not have come to that door and shot him.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're aware, about 3 or 4 days ago, a guy who was masquerading as a delivery person in Connecticut knocked on somebody's door and tried to come in. And fortunately, the homeowner fought him off, and he ran away. But the guy who tried to enter the house had a gun in his hand.
Right, and I understand that as you said, the fear factor is there, and I know that. My issue is
Where's the responsible reporting?
exactly that's what I'm talking about. Again,
That's and I don't want to say that represents 80%. It might be 40 or 50% of the problem here. If the media is going to portray or paint black people as being violent,
Right.
of course, in a mindset, if I hear that every day, all day long, every black person I encounter is a threat to me.
and if I'm running a story on my top rated show, because I'm not giving him kudos. I'm just stating the fact. Tucker Carlson has the highest rated cable news show out of all the cable news shows. So if I'm running a cycle comparing Chicago to Mogadishu, and I'm catering it to the demographic that and telling them to be fearful of these people, that just exacerbates the problem even more so, to the point that we have an incident like we saw in Kansas City involving this homeowner and young Mr. Yarrow. And again, I just thank God that this young man did not get killed, but he's going to need counseling and what have you for quite some time, if not for the rest of his life, because as I said, his mother was on CBS Mornings and saying that the young man can't stop replaying the incident over and over again in his mind.
Well, he'll play. He's traumatized, and I hope not for the rest of his life, but he's traumatized for a long time. And I'm going to finish this way, Jeff. Where's the Walter Crown Pirates? They're gone. Where's the Jeff Doggett? They're gone. The truth and factual reporting is more important than what's going on today. Sensationalism is what leads the news.
Agendas, yes.
And I don't want to make it into a black-white issue. But white folks become white folks too. But that very seldomly leads the news.
Right.
Right, because the young woman in upstate New York that we were talking about prior to your call, she was white. She was killed by a white man. And again, as we said, all they did was pulled in his driveway by mistake.
Well, even on the street, just walking from to the store, from a mall or whatever, white people are killing white people. But that does not necessarily lead or make the news.
Right.
No, that's and to your point, Al, and that's why we asked in the last hour, if you were listening then, well, let's say you were based on your comments, but that's why I asked Ben Holbert when he was on, who decides what stories get aired and how they get aired, and so there you go, right there.
Well, I heard that, and what's the goal of any television outlet? It's ratings.
Right.
And let's just put a station in Detroit. Let's make that one of the major stations, which is a nice suburb in Cleveland. They're not going to lead the news. These stories not going to be about white folks killing white folks. It's going to be about 4 or 5 kids or whoever, whatever age, get caught shoplifting in Detroit, or somebody who got shot on 55th. And it.
Yep.
That's what's going to lead the news, because the sensationalism is what draws like, and that's the demonization of the culture of black folks done by Fox.
And
I hope they lose the next two too.
so do I. So do I, and I hope the Smartmatic doesn't settle. I hope Smartmatic goes for the whole 2.5 billion, because that's what they're going for. You know,
True.
Dominion settled, if you want to call it a settlement, $787.5 million. They settled because they were going. I think theirs was original lawsuit was 1.5 billion, and now Smartmatic is 2.5 billion. I hope they go for the whole 2.5 billion. I hope they win it all.
It would be interesting, and I'm really gonna let you go because I know you got the rest of the show, Joe. It would be interesting to know how much Fox's insurance company paid of that settlement.
I heard a report. I heard a report, Al. I heard a report, and I should have written it down when I heard it. But I heard a report on a rival network of Fox talking about that very topic, and they mentioned the amount, but I don't remember what it was.
What that the insurance company covered?
Yes.
Yeah, because most media outlets have what's called E&O, errors and omissions, to protect them from that perspective. But go back. It's a great show, Jeff, and thanks for the topic.
Thank you for calling, and thank you for listening. You're listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio, WMDS, where we don't bring the static, but we sure don't bring the noise. And the last of the incidents, and I'll very briefly go through this because I believe the point has been made, but I just wanted to share this. There were two cheerleaders in the state of Texas. Here again, two young white teenage girls who mistakenly went to a car to get into that car. Then they realized that wasn't the right car. Again, something I've done before, and I'm sure all of you have done too. And the owner of that vehicle, seeing them going to the car, shot them. Now he is a Mexican American who did this shooting. But here again, the whole gun culture that we have in this country, and the whole fear that we have in this country, the whole epidemic of fear, and that epidemic being exacerbated, the flames of that fire, if you will, being fanned by irresponsible media outlets, have led to this. And this morphs right into our next topic, which will probably be our last one for the day. And this next topic that I want to deal with is surprising state murder rate stats. On these same networks that we talk about, the ongoing narrative that you hear on these networks is that the quote Democrat-led cities in these blue states, the murder rates are out of control, unquote. And while I will say that major American cities, murder rates are high, what would you say if I were to tell you that the states that lead the country in murder rates don't have any of these cities, with the exception of a couple? What if I were to tell you that the most violent states, if you will, that have the highest murder rates in this country are South Carolina, Mississippi, Louisiana, Tennessee, Arkansas, Alaska, Maryland, Oklahoma, North Carolina, and even though it's not a city, Washington, D.C. So, with the exception of Washington, D.C., which is a district, it's not considered a state, it's the District of Columbia, hence the D.C., for those who didn't know, and Maryland, all of these other states that I named are all red states, all controlled by Republican governors, with the exception of Maryland, Republican legislatures, control those states. Their major cities are in these red states. And these have the highest per capita murder rates of all the states in America, the ones that I just named. Again, if you missed it, I'll read them off to you again so that you will know where they are. Again, they are the following states: South Carolina, Mississippi, red. So South Carolina, red state. Mississippi, red state. Louisiana, red state. Tennessee, red state. Arkansas, red state. Alaska, red state. Maryland, purple. They've got a Democratic governor who was just elected, but their state legislature rather is Republican controlled. Oklahoma, red state. North Carolina, red state, and the District of Columbia. So I bring that out to you so that here again, because you hear this narrative, especially in right-wing controlled media outlets, but it's being reported or regurgitated, I should say, in also more centrist and factual networks like CNN, NBC, CBS, and ABC, who basically just report the news without agendas. All right? You hear this being regurgitated. And so when you start to hear this, and this is constantly before you, and this is what's constantly brought out by these media sources, you then begin to believe this lie that the most dangerous places in America are Democrat. And again, for those of you that are new listeners to this show, I do not ride donkeys or elephants. All right? I just state the truth as it is. All right? And so the narrative that you keep hearing on the Foxes, the One Americas, the Newsmaxes, but also being regurgitated on the level, if you will, traditional news media outlets, is that the most dangerous places in America are these Democrat-controlled or these blue state-controlled metropolitan areas. And yet the statistics don't bear that out. The statistics bear out that these red states have the highest per capita murder rates in the country. Now, if you don't believe that, fine, you can do the same thing I did. You can go on your computer. Actually, I went on my phone and just asked Google search and said, tell me what states have the highest per capita murder rates in the United States. That's where I got my information from. So if you don't believe me, that's fine. Do your own research like I did. So what this is telling me is that these states, these red states, which are highly gun-populated states as well, have the highest per capita murder rates. I mean, but is that really, though, is that a shock? Doesn't it seem logical that where you have more guns, there's going to be higher rates or higher incidences of murder than places where you have less? And again, I am not coming on here saying that people's Second Amendment rights should be taken away from them. By the way, the Second Amendment doesn't really, if you really read the Constitution, really doesn't guarantee you the right to own a gun. It talks about that there will be a state militia. So how they morph that into Jeff Doggett being able to own guns, I don't know. But that's another topic for another day. But I am not on the air advocating that everybody in America should have their guns taken from them. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that more guns is not the solution, and this is what a narrative that you keep hearing, particularly from Republicans on the right, that either do not have the courage of their convictions enough to stand up for what they know is right, to stand up for what the majority of people want. By the way, the majority of gun owners want, and that is some type of sensible gun legislation. 90% of Americans want background checks, want red flag laws. 56% of Americans want automatic weapons to be banned. So however you do the math, that's the majority of people in this country. And so because, and again, I'm not picking on Republicans. Again, as I said, I don't ride donkeys or elephants, I ride the truth. Because you have a large segment of Republican legislatures, be they in state, city, or in the House of Representatives or in the Senate of the United States, that either do not have the courage of their convictions to do what they know is right, or are on the extreme that buy into all of this. We are not going to have sensible gun legislation in this country. They buy into the narrative, the false narrative, that the more guns you have, the safer it is, and the statistics do not bear it out. The stats don't bear it. The numbers don't support this view. So you're going to continue to have Uvaldes. You're going to continue to have Covenant Presbyterian in Nashville. You're going to continue to have Marjorie Stoneman Douglas in Florida. You're going to continue to have Sandy Hook. You're going to continue to have Mother Emanuel. You're going to continue to have Tree of Life Synagogue. You're going to continue to have the 4th of July shooting in Highland Park, Illinois. You're going to continue to have what happened in Las Vegas a few years ago. You're going to continue to have Buffalo. You're going to continue to have El Paso, and so on ad nauseum. That's going to continue to happen, folks. And it's going to get worse rather than get better. Saddens me to say this. And I understand that you cannot legislate all this away. I get this. I'm not coming on here with some kind of Pollyannish panacea that if you have an assault weapons ban, then all of a sudden you're going to eliminate mass shooting. I get that there's still going to be some. However, if you are able to enact this legislation nationwide and you have a significant decrease in these type of shootings, isn't it worth it? You do not need an AR-15 to go out in the woods and hunt Bambi. And you do not need police departments. Because you know the right is always trumpeting, we love the blue, we're pro-blue, blue lives matter. Police departments across the country don't want this. They say they are outgunned. That's why you saw them hesitant going into that school in Uvalde. They were outgunned. That's why you saw what just recently happened in Tennessee at the school, where those police officers ran in there. They were outgunned. They know their life is on the line because that person has an automatic weapon. They're outgunned. We saw it in Buffalo because that exposed them. Well, the best way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Well, the security guard at the Tops grocery store in Buffalo, he was armed. Guess what? He lost his life. And he got shots off. But because Peyton Gendron, folks, we need to have sensible gun legislation in this country. And until we do it, get ready for more of what we've seen. We've come towards the end of our program right now, and as we do, we close each week with our hero and our zero of the week. And our hero of the week this week is Dr. Charles Stanley, Dr. Charles Stanley, for those who don't know, Dr. Charles Stanley died this past week at the age of 90. Dr. Charles Stanley was the pastor emeritus of the First Baptist Church of Atlanta, and he's known for that, but he was better known nationwide and worldwide for In Touch Ministries with Charles Stanley. He was just a noble man, a giant as a pastor, a giant in the world of Christianity, very humble, taught from the scriptures, taught the truth, man of beyond reproach. Someone that I was introduced to by my wife back in the mid 80s when he came on a local Moody radio station here in the Cleveland area. And I was exposed to him then, and he became, even though I never met him, he became a mentor of mine in the preaching and teaching ministry through reading several of his books, from being a subscriber to his In Touch magazine that you would get each month. So Dr. Charles Stanley is our hero of the week. Rest in heaven, Dr. Stanley. And I'm sure that once you entered in, you heard, "Well done, good and faithful servant." We're going to miss you. But fortunately, you've left behind just a plethora of tapes, videotapes, and books, and what have you, and that we can still get your teaching, even though you've gone home to be with the Lord. Our zero of the week is what we were just talking about, and that's the American gun culture. The American gun culture is our zero of the week. The American gun mentality is our zero of the week. If you have to ask why, then either you weren't listening to this program this last hour, or you've had your head buried in the sand. And to quote former Ohio State University head football coach Earl Bruce, when you have your head buried in the sand, that makes it easy to get your butt kicked. I'll let that digest with you. You've been listening to The Right Side on No Static Radio, where we don't bring the static, but we sure enough bring the noise. We want to thank our guest in the first hour, Mayor of Woodmere Village here in Northeast Ohio, Ben Holbert. I want to thank all of you that were listening to us here for these last couple hours or so, for those of you who watched this on Facebook Live and on YouTube. But right now, I see that my time is up. Thank you very much for your time. And until next Saturday at 3 p.m., shalom.
We'd like to thank you for tuning in to The Right Side with your host, Jeff Doggett, here on the station where we don't bring no static, but we sure don't bring the noise, nostaticradio.net. Make sure you guys check us out on social media where we absolutely love to hear from you on Facebook.com/No Static Radio LLC, on Twitter at No Static _ radio, on Instagram at The Real _ No Static Radio, and on YouTube at No Static Radio. And of course, if you feel generous and feel like donating to small business radio station or to donate to one of the show hosts, please feel free to do so. $ No Static Radio. And thank you so much. Also, if you guys would like to listen to replays of this show and others on nostaticradio.net, please make sure you check us out on Mixler or Mixcloud.com. Just type in No Static Radio on the toolbar for replay of this show and all others on the platform. And of course, for continuous streaming, that means no rebuffering, no refreshing the page. Just sit back, relax, and let it do its thing for a few seconds, and boom, you got us on tunein.com, liveonlineradio.net, or Media Q, of course, for all shows on this platform. And for all things No Static Radio, including up and coming events, merchandise, and an in-depth look at all our great show hosts here, please, please, please check out our website at www.nostaticradio.net for all things No Static Radio. And once again, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us on this wet but sensational Saturday. And you know what it is. We have more music for your listening pleasure all weekend long on your Voice of the Revolution, nostaticradio.net. Powered by Google, partner with Colors, and sponsored by Lamont Avenue Wines and Hot Girls Gear. You guys have a wonderful weekend. Go Cavs tomorrow. And and also go Guardians, and you guys be safe out there. Peace, love, and happiness.